Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Jay Joy, who is the founder and managing partner of Bridgeforth LLP. Bridgeforth LLP advises agribusiness all across the U.S., and Jay has spent his entire career focused on businesses in agriculture. We'll start out talking about Jay's past experiences in several different executive level roles on agribusinesses and farms around the country. And we're going to really spend most of the time talking about professionalizing roles at the top levels of farm businesses and how farm businesses can professionalize for the future. That includes advisory boards, boards of directors, and potentially even hiring executive level people outside of your family business. So I know you're going to get a few nuggets out of this episode. I really enjoyed this conversation that I had with Jay, as I always do. I've known Jay for quite a while now, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Jay Joy. Well, Jay Joy, it is great to have you on the AgCulture Podcast here today. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's been a few years since we connected, but I'm glad you reached out and we're able to get reconnected here.
Yeah, I'm excited the conversation that we're going to have here today. Looking at some business concepts that you haven't always seen in agriculture in the past, but something that you're well versed in and that you help farmers in the U.S. on a regular basis with. So to get right into it, you've held many different business roles on agricultural businesses. Could you give us a glimpse into some of those roles and some of the unique situations that arose to get you into those roles?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just give you the Reader's Digest version of my background. So I started my career, formal career in banking. So spent the first 10 years of my career financing large agribusinesses, mostly here in the High Plains. So feed yards, dairies, grain elevators, large row crop. Transitioned out of that role into a general management role of a large dairy enterprise in Western Kansas. So spent about a year out there on the farm, GM of a couple big dairies and a big farming operation. And then ultimately found my way into the CFO role, specifically here in North Central Kansas where I live, working full-time for the Larson family, Best of Four Farms. So I'd always had the idea that I wanted to be a CFO. Didn't really at that point, I was probably a little naive as to what that actually meant until I was actually sitting in the seat. And kudos to the Larson family for giving me that opportunity. So I spent about 3.5 years full-time with the Larson family as their CFO. And then just kept getting calls and reach outs from people that I had met along the way that were needing help in some form or fashion. And so, again, very fortunate that the Larsons allowed me to convert them essentially from an employer into a client, which I still work with them to this day. I sit on their board, highly involved in any big picture decisions that they're looking to make. But what that did is that allowed me to go out and start doing consulting work full time for others. And so the way I look at it is, when I first hung my own shingle, I was doing mostly pretty heavy accounting work in terms of going in, setting up accounting processes, helping clients generate or get on a routine of generating good, timely, accurate financial reporting. Both for their lender and for themselves as investors and owners and managers. And so I've sat in that fractional CFO role. I did do some work with two clients, actually, where I started out as kind of the family business advisor, fractional CFO. That grew into more of an interim, executive type role, interim CEO, interim GM type of a position. And then over time, it kind of navigated back to being more of a fractional or family business advisor. So what I would say is that my career has been very, you know, I've held a lot of seats. And so what I can tell you is that, I've learned a lot every step of the way, and each move that I've made, although I couldn't really figure out how it was going to happen at the time, each move that I made kind of set me up for the next move. And so, you start as a banker, you get into an operations role, then you get into a CFO role, then you get into a fractional role, and then ultimately a family business advisor role. I think I've been on the path, quite frankly, to get to where I'm at now, which is more family business advisor versus fractional CFO, because I've learned a lot of things, both from a technical standpoint and then just generally from the dynamics of a family business standpoint that have, I guess, allowed me to kind of set in that family business advisor chair and to be able to look at the family business both from a business perspective, but also understand that a family business is quite unique. And let's face it, 95% of the businesses in agriculture are family businesses, right? And so from my standpoint, it's good to have someone on your team that understands, again, the business that you're in, but then also the dynamics of a family business.
Yeah. So along with that, being more of a family business advisor now, and thinking back to the beginning of your career, in agriculture, most agricultural businesses are kind of run by the seat of our pants, right? We don't have titles. We just, whatever needs to get done needs to get done. And whoever's there to do it's going to be the person to do it, right? That's kind of the mentality. But over your career, I think you've seen the industry and large, as businesses get larger, professionalize and have these more formal roles. Talk about that process over the course of your career that you've seen, and what's the necessity for that?
Well, I think really what it comes back to is the owners of that business at some point have to make a conscious mindset shift from being a doer to a director, right? I mean, agricultural historically has been very operationally focused, right? It's all about getting the work done. Things have to get done. Who's going to do them? How are we going to do them? Are we doing those things well, right? So very operational mindset. What I've seen, the businesses that have been able to successfully go from, point A to point B in terms of size, number of cows milked, number of acres farmed, dollars of revenue, number of employees. It's those businesses that have kind of taken a step back and told themselves, you know what? I have got to change the way that I think about my business from operations to all encompassing, meaning, hey, there's more. It takes a lot more to make a farm business successful than just being a good operator, right? We've got to learn how to manage people. We've got to have really good professional relationships around us. Our accountants, our attorneys, our bankers, our risk management advisors, right? There's this whole ecosystem of people around a successful ag business that exists to support the growth of that business. And so again, kind of coming back, it's really changing the mindset from being operations focused or a doer to management focused or being a good director of resources.
Okay. Now, in your mind, when would that start? Is there a certain dollar amount threshold that you really need to have that mindset at, or should every operation, no matter how small, really think that way?
I think it comes, I don't know that there's a real hard and fast rule, but I think if you get to a point where you're probably more than 10 employees, I would say, somebody's got to be up here, kind of directing the resources instead of, being that player coach that's also playing the game while you're trying to coach the game kind of a thing. So I don't know that if there's a asset size or a number of acres or number of animals. To me, it's more about the number of people that are involved in the day-to-day management operations of the business. And if you get to that 10 area, there does need to be somebody that kind of, takes a step up and is more concerned with directing resources, whether that's people resources, capital resources, intellectual resources, relationship resources. So you've got to have somebody kind of sitting up here that's more of that director role than just, getting your fingernails dirty and driving the tractor or feeding the cows or whatever.
Yep. And you had mentioned that you had been fractional CFO, fractional CEO positions. When does an operation know whether they need a fractional person in that role or a full-time person in that role?
That's a really good question, because it's different for every organization. And I would say, how does one know if they need a fractional? Probably it's when their accountant or their banker either asks them questions that they don't know the answers to, or they flat out suggest, hey, maybe it's time for you to think about getting a fractional CFO in here. In terms of that conversion from fractional to full time, I don't know. So I don't know that size is necessarily the determining factor on that. Really, to me, it's about complexity of the operation and complexity of the business. Because I know some very large row crop farming operations, that farm tens of thousands of acres. But if you boil it all down, their need for a full-time CFO just probably isn't there, even though they're farming a lot of acres, have a lot of capital involved, as compared to, another kind of a manufacturing type value added operation where there's, maybe not as many dollars invested or dollars of revenue, but they're turning out widgets and they've got a lot more people involved and there's a lot more transactions. And so there's a need for a lot more detailed accounting information. That type of an operation would probably need a full-time CFO, a lot sooner than the row crop operation when you're comparing it on, dollars invested and or dollars of revenue.
Okay.
So point being is I don't know that there's like a cookie cutter, like inside the box type of an answer. Really, to me, it depends upon the complexity and the nature of the business, underlying business.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And we're talking here about family businesses. Obviously, the businesses that you were in, you were not family of, correct?
That's correct.
So talk to us about that. I know it's very hard to have somebody with a CFO or CEO title that doesn't also share your last name, right? So how does that work in a family business?
To me, in some respects, like that can be a very competitive advantage. It's a very substantial competitive advantage. And so I guess let me take a step back. The reason that I think I've been able to step in, whether it was as a full-time CFO or a fractional, in a family business where I was not part of the family, is I was able to look at the situation very objectively, meaning here's the facts, here's what we need to do, without a lot of that, I'll call it that family dynamic, emotion, essentially baggage attached to it. I'm a non-biased third party that can literally step in and see a situation for what it is. And let's be honest too, if the family doesn't like what I'm telling them, or they don't like the suggestion that I'm making, like I don't have to see them at Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? I can be focused more on what do we need to do to grow this organization, from a business standpoint. And yes, it's good to understand and acknowledge some of the family dynamic, but if you let the family dynamic run the business, at some point you won't have a business to run. And so I truly believe that there will come a point, and this is one of my key taglines I use with clients. There will come a point, every family business has an expiration date where either the business outgrows what the family can provide it, or the family outgrows what the business is capable of providing. There will come a day where you will have to get non-family management involved.
That brings up another thing that I wanted to discuss that I think kind of goes along with what you just said. the concept of board of directors and advisory boards for a farm business. Could you talk to us a little bit? I know that you said you had sat on several different ones. What does that look like? And when in the process of developing your family agricultural business, do you really need to think about a board of directors?
In terms of like a very formal fiduciary board of directors, I would say that is in agriculture, that is very much still the exception and not the norm. Now, advisory boards, there are getting to be a lot of organizations in ag that do have some structured advisory boards. I would say that most people, whether they realize it or not, whether it's a formal thing or an informal thing, I think most farmers actually do have an advisory board, meaning they have key people that they reach out to and get advice from in certain areas if they feel like they need it. Now, where I would say some farms, or quite a few farms, I think they're missing some power is they don't bring those advisors together in a structured, kind of a coordinated meeting format. Meaning, I may be a very large farmer and I may go to this guy for this thing and this guy for this thing and this guy for this thing, or gal. But if I don't bring all those people together, I'm missing out on some of the collective power of having 3 or 4 or 5 smart brains sitting in the same room, hearing the same, message, or being presented the same problem. I think there is a lot of power. Now, if you bring those folks together in a kind of a less formal advisory board, or it's a formal structured fiduciary board, I'm a very big proponent of, you get to a certain size, you need to have some sort of a formalized board process, whether it's a voting fiduciary board or just, advisory sounding board to bring together 3 or 4 or 5 times a year to kind of bounce ideas off of. I think there's some value in that process, definite value in that process.
And how do you know whether you should really look at having a fiduciary board versus just a standard advisory board? Somebody that's actually got some power over your business.
Yeah. I think, to me, there's one key determinant, and that is if you have owners that aren't all descendants of the same family, meaning you have some non-family folks that have capital invested in the business, then I think you owe it. To those non-family owners to put a fiduciary board in place to hold management accountable. Really, that's what I think in terms of, okay, so why fiduciary versus advisory? Fiduciary, you want those folks to have a little bit of power because, quite frankly, CEOs need held accountable too.
Yeah, somebody's got to hold their feet to the fire, right?
Exactly. And I think too many times what I've seen is you put these boards in place, but you don't really give them a lot of power. So, you've got a large organization, you've got a professional management team, you do have a board in place, but yet the CEO is still running it like a sole proprietorship. Like, to me, that is not a good situation at all, especially if there is non-family members involved in an ownership capacity. I think you owe it to those non-family members and the family members, quite frankly, too, to have a fiduciary board in place to hold management accountable. And that gets back to this concept of that I'm a huge proponent of, is when we're talking family business, we need to separate family from business, but we also need to separate ownership from management. Oftentimes in agriculture, we think about family business as being one thing and ownership and management as being one thing as well. And I think our lack of ability to kind of separate those things apart and talk about and view each as separate things, I think it really complicates our lives a lot of time.
Yeah, and I think it's more and more important as these operations get larger and larger. I mean, you might have a family farm business with $100 million of assets over 3 generations, and maybe only 2 people out of 8 people in the family that have equity in it are actually operating it, right? So I've seen that more and more recently, where there's more non-operational ownership than operational ownership, because the business has gotten too large to split up, but family still wants to have equity in it.
I think that's a good thing in the fact that you get to a certain point and it's less about the operations and the management, and it becomes more about the investment and the vehicle to create wealth for the family, right? And so, if your business converts from the primary purpose is providing jobs for the family to the primary purpose is providing wealth for the family, then as an investor, your objective is to put the best team on the field, regardless of the last name on the back of the jersey.
A point that a lot of people have missed in the past that's becoming more and more, people are becoming more and more aware of.
But that's what's, to me, that's what separates the folks that are going to be able to successfully transfer ownership of the family business from first to second to third to fourth. Transitioning successful management of the family business across 4 generations, that's extremely hard to do. Extremely hard to do.
Yeah, because not everyone in that same in different generations is going to have the same skill sets,
or quite frankly, the same passion or desire for agriculture.
Right. Yep.
I mean, I've seen it a handful of times, or more than a handful of times. Very successful second generation ag business either gets sold or fails or splits up because nobody in the third generation wants to be part of it.
Right.
From a management standpoint. But if you don't tie that management requirement to ownership, I think if you give most people the option, do you want to be an investor and an owner in this business and not necessarily be involved in day-to-day management? More often than not, they'd say, yeah, I would be glad to be an owner and an investor, but I don't want to run the thing.
Could you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues that you're seeing in the work that you've done and are currently doing as businesses have gotten very, very large, family businesses, other than some of the ones that we already discussed?
I think there's a couple of things. I'd say the first one would be it almost always is the case where operational capacity like outgrows or outpaces like the administrative capacity of the business, meaning we're very forward thinking. We're very progressive when it comes to employing new operating technologies, but we're still accounting for things the way we did in 1985. We're still generating financial reporting that doesn't really tell us whether or not we're making money, and if so, how much and where. And the third one would be is we're still trying to finance these businesses the same way we financed, them when they were, a quarter or a tenth of the size as what they currently are. And so it's like these businesses grow, but the supporting infrastructure doesn't keep pace. So that's quite frankly, that's one of the reasons I sometimes have a job of coming in and being able to help these clients really understand, why do we need to build this infrastructure to match our operating capabilities? Why is it important? Well, the reason it's important is because if you've got more owners and you've got more dollars involved, like the requirements of borrowing $5 million are not going to be the same requirements of borrowing $50 million or even $500 million, right? And so as our capital needs go up, the quality and the timeliness and the accuracy of our financial reporting and how we account for things and report things, it has to go up as well. So I would say that's one of the bigger issues that I've seen just over the course of my career. The other issue that I'm seeing a lot lately is, in order to keep highly talented managers and leaders, giving them skin in the game, giving them a reason to want to stay more than being an employee, getting them not just emotionally invested in the business, but also financially invested in the business. as I think about what sets some operations apart from others and why some have been able to grow and scale and perform better than others, more than others, I think it's the ones that are doing it faster and bigger and better and more profitably are the ones that allow key employees to not just be employees. They get the option to buy in financially. And so I think that's going to continue as these operations, and I don't care what sector of ag you're talking about, there's consolidation going on across the board. As these organizations continue to consolidate, I think you will see a real separation of the winners and losers based upon their mindset around who can become an owner and who can't.
Now, going back to your point about the financing there, I want to go on a little bit of a rabbit trail just to get your personal perspective. How has things changed over the last 24 months with interest rates tripling or quadrupling on some of these operations? Has that really changed how they handle operating, or what's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. Out of necessity. I mean, agriculture is a capital intensive business to begin with. And then, you throw on top of that, if there are some organizations that have grown rapidly over the last 5 years, and the way that they've done that is primarily with debt. So you've got a capital intensive business to begin with, and then you add on some additional leverage. That can put some real strain on people's bottom lines, and it has. I mean, if you triple the cost of interest, used to be it was just a small piece of your P&L, right? Now, If you're highly leveraged in a capital-intensive industry, that interest expense line item, that's a real thing. I mean, that literally could be the difference between positive margin or pretty healthy positive margin and either break even or negative margin. Where, it used to be 2, 3, 4%, who cares, right? I mean, the cost of money is essentially nothing. So when we're looking at capital investments and growth and leverage and debt and all that stuff, it doesn't really move the needle. But now it darn sure does. And what it also, in my mind, has really changed the way people operate is how they view kind of the cost of less than fully utilized assets and inventory. Used to, you could carry inventory for 6 months, 10 months, 12 months. Didn't really matter because it didn't cost you really anything to do it. Now, depending on how much you carry, that can be the difference again. That can be the difference between profit and loss. So yes, to answer your question.
That might be as much as a whole percentage point a month.
Correct. So cost of capital, that has really changed the way people make decisions around CapEx and, quite frankly, just inventory levels that they want to carry in their business.
Well, I just wanted to hit that point because I knew you had some good background and some good feedback on that. So appreciate you going there with me.
The other thing I would say around that, Paul, is I think we're just in the middle of this, but we're really seeing kind of a divergence around how many committed capital players want to be involved in production agriculture.
Yeah.
And really what it comes down to is as these operations grow and consolidate, it takes a lot more dollars to run them. So there's, I would say at the kind of the local and even regional bank level, some of these operations are really outgrowing the lending capacity of their longtime lenders, right? So you've got the consolidation thing kind of at play that's kind of separating who wants to be a player in ag finance and who doesn't. And the other thing is just the understanding. These operations are getting complex, and the number of bankers that really understand the operational side of agriculture and what kind of risk that presents to the bank, just the number of knowledgeable bankers continues to go down and down and down. And so we've got growing capital need with less knowledgeable bankers. And to me, what that's creating is there's going to come a day when, you're going to have maybe 20% of the number of really committed capital providers to production ag finance as compared to what we used to have.
You're going to see consolidation in that just as much as you will on the farm side.
You would think that. Yes, I think banks will continue to consolidate, but when that happens, what I've noticed is the local bank, they understand the ups and downs of agriculture, and they're willing to absorb that risk on their earnings stream. These bigger banks, they like consistency, right? They like consistency. And ag inherently is a very inconsistent industry.
So do you see that as opportunity for bigger funds, maybe some really large investment funds coming into ag, because they can kind of take some of that inconsistency and they're looking at a 30 to 50 year investment because they've got a lot of money to park for a long time and they want to do it once. Is that,
Yep.
Do you see that happening?
And the other key point to that is I think you'll see more alternative lenders come into the ag space for that reason that you just noted. And the other reason is they're non-regulated, right? And so they can afford to see those ups and downs where the regulated financial institutions, people that are under the oversight of FDIC, OCC, and state banking regulators, those folks, they don't know anything about agriculture. In a lot of cases, they don't want to know anything about agriculture. And so I think if you've got the regulatory agencies that don't get it, that kind of naturally forces the banks to not want to get it.
Right.
So it's better to avoid the fight a lot of times. And so that's why I think
if you're a small family, well, not small, but if you're a family farm business and you really want to grow, continue to grow, how do you seek out investment funding like that? What would be your suggestion to looking into some of those opportunities?
I think you've got to, right, wrong, or indifferent, you've got to maintain a relationship with the players in the industry, whether you're doing business with them or not. And so from a banking standpoint, the farm credit system is by far the biggest lender to agriculture in the U.S. So you've got farm credits. You've got some regional banks around the country that do a good job. You've got the folks like the Rabo AgriFinances, the BMOs. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with in my region. And plus, I work for all three of them. So CoBank, Farm Credit, or CoBank, Rabo, and BMO. So you've got to maintain the relationships with those folks. Others I would point to would be like a MetLife or Prudential, folks that Equitable AgriFinance, folks that have been involved in long-term real estate financing, quite frankly, longer than the farm credit system has been around. Most people don't know that. But these insurance companies have been providing farm secured, real estate loans for over 140 years in some cases. And so, it's going to take those folks. But then again, I think, and you're already starting to see it, there are some alternative lenders that are coming into the space. And so I would say just try to, as best you can, try to figure out who those folks are. A quick Google search of ag investment fund or, something to that effect. It'll yield some results and give you some names. And quite frankly, people do business with people. So just figure out how to get connected with those folks and see what kind of a relationship you can develop.
Great. Well, that's some great nuggets. I didn't plan on going there today, but I'm glad we went down that path. So before we get going here, I got a couple more quick questions for you. You're one of the founders of Bridgeforth LLP. Could you explain to us a little bit about what you do at Bridgeforth and kind of why you decided to go from being a one-man band to working with a group of specialized professionals?
Well, I think there's strength in numbers, right? And the whole reason why I decided to transition from being a one-man band to starting this group is, quite frankly, I didn't feel that it was fair to my clients to have the amount of concentration risk in me with me being just a one-man band, right? And so that's why I got together with two partners and then have since added a handful of other advisors on the team. Is I want my clients to know that if for whatever reason something happens to me, there's somebody else on our team. Maybe they don't know everything involved in the client engagement or what we've been working on, but there is someone on our team that could step in my absence or any of our advisors' absence and create some consistency of the path that we're on. So that's kind of the whole reason why I decided to bring a group together, is just the whole strength in numbers. And then also the other piece to that was from a branding and an advertising standpoint, it's so much better for all of us, the 7 or 8 of us, to brand ourselves one time than each one of us try to brand ourselves individually. So have 8 brands out in the marketplace. So from a branding standpoint, from a risk management to client standpoint, that's why we brought the group together. In terms of what we're doing, so originally, like I mentioned, kind of our group started, or I started, as kind of that fractional CFO service, and then just over time have evolved into more family business advisory type engagements. I think there's definitely a need for both, and so we're going to grow both of those practices, whether it's fractional or family business advisor. But there's also, I mentioned earlier, this concept of alternative capital. We haven't launched yet, but we've been working on something to that effect. Because you think about it, like, who better to come in and, on the one hand, be able to make a very smart underwriting and investment decision? Who better to be able to do that than someone that's been working with an organization for a handful of years in either a fractional CFO or a family business advisory arrangement, right? Like, you understand the opportunities, the challenges, the dynamics, all of it. So from an investment standpoint, to me, that makes a lot of sense to do. From a capital standpoint, so I say a lot of the advice that we give clients, it all costs money, right? And so if we can go to a client and say, hey, here's the opportunity, or here's the problem we're trying to solve, and here's the recommendation. Oh, by the way, we'll put our money where our mouth is. We'll help you finance this. We'll be a partner in this with you. To me, I think there's some real power to that. And to my knowledge, there's nobody out in the marketplace that's trying to combine or put this whole concept of family business advisor, fractional CFO together with actual investment dollars. And quite frankly, that's part of the reason why we named Bridgeforth. Bridgeforth is we want this capital to be the bridge forth for clients to get from where they are to where they believe that they can get to. It's not intended to be a long-term thing. It's really to bridge that organization forth, both from an advisory standpoint, but also from a capital standpoint.
That's a great concept. I really like that. So, one more thing before we go. What, in your mind, has set apart the successful organizations that you've worked with from the ones that didn't make it?
They looked at their businesses as businesses and not operations. They didn't look at their farm as a farm operation. I'm not a farming operation. This is a farm business. We have capital, human capital, financial capital, intellectual capital. We've got capital that we're going to invest, and in return, in exchange, we expect a return on that investment. Right? They didn't do it because they loved the activity of farming. Yes, I'm sure most of the successful ones, they like the activity of farming, but that's not the only reason they do it, right? We're not farming for a lifestyle, right? We are farming because we've made a conscious decision. Yes, we like the activity of farming, but this can also be a profitable venture where we get an above average return on our capital invested. And I think the successful ones look at the decisions they make through that lens. It's not about operations. Yes, it's about operations, but how does that translate into successful financial performance of the business?
I completely agree with you there. That was a great point to end on. And I really appreciate you being here today, Jay. And we're going to put all your information in our show notes. So if you want to reach out to Jay, talk more about what he's doing with Bridgeforth, check out that in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here, Jay.
Thanks, Paul. Anytime. I love talking about this stuff. As you can tell, it kind of gets my juices going. It gets me all passionate and using my hands and stuff. So, yeah, no, look forward to being on future podcasts with you. So, but I appreciate the invite, and hopefully something that I said can benefit you and or your audience here today.
Great. Well, thank you, Jay. Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Jay. He has a wealth of knowledge, and we had a really good discussion, I think, on how to professionalize your agribusiness, family business in agriculture. So if you're interested in learning more about what Jay does, check out our show notes. And as always, if you found value in this episode, please share it with somebody that you know that would also find value from it. And if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review, we would really love that as well. Until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.